You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Hello and welcome to another edition of St. Paul's Letters to America. I am your host for this program, Ray Gerard, and along with me is my co-host, Mr. Bob Hennekeys. Bob.
Good to see you, Ray. Glad to be here.
Thanks for being here.
You bet.
So this is the program that asks, hey, what if St. Paul were alive today? And what if he were alive and here in America and he could see what's happening in our country? What would he tell us? You know, he's the most prolific writer in the New Testament. We have, kept and studied and tried to follow, the recommendations in all of his letters. He's affected how many millions and billions of lives over the centuries? So if he were alive today, what would this particular person have to tell us? Well, we know that we can give you a letter from St. Paul to America as if it was written today. And why can we do that? We can do that simply because we know that everything he wrote in the past is true. It contains truth, and truth does not change over time. It does not change from place to place. It's the same everywhere for everyone all the time. So what he wrote before is equally applicable to us here in America today as it was ever before. And the only question is, are we listening? Now, today, our program is going to be entitled Riders of the Purple Rage. Now, if you think that's a little bit of a play on words, it's probably because you maybe have heard somewhere along the way the title of a Western novel, an iconic Western novel, Riders of the Purple Sage. And in this particular novel, it is credited with perhaps establishing the framework for so many Western movies, TV shows. The American love affair with the Western story probably started with Zane Grey. And he wrote this book back in 1915. And the title refers to this upland part of Utah where there's all of these sage bushes that had these purple flowers as part of them. And there'd be fields of these things. And they would actually, and you could ride through them, or ride the country looking at these long, never-ending fields of this purple sage. And the book involves, in great detail, book contains in very great detail some breakneck rides of people on horseback through these, sage-filled areas. And so what have you got? You've got these beautiful, purple, lovely flowers. At the same time, you're riding at a breakneck clip. Guns are being fired at you. So you've got peace and beauty along at the same time with danger and imminent, death. So you've got these two very different things juxtaposed with one another. And in a way, that's kind of like life. We go through our lives struggling for peace. We want love. And at the same time, we're often confronted with hostility from other people's, things we do to other people that we're not happy with, things that disturb our conscience and create turmoil just in our own minds. So that's, in a way, that's, how we live. So, this dichotomy is with us. And, it's never more, I think, obvious than when we look at what's going on in our cities today. We have so much, in terms of so much violence, so much rioting, looting, violence, murder. That's part of a lot of these so-called protests. And so the thought occurred, well, how would St. Paul react to that? So the submission we have for you today as a reaction of St. Paul is this. Although they knew God, they did not accord him glory as God or give him thanks. Instead, they became vain in their reasoning and exchanged the glory of the immortal God for the likeness of an image of mortal man. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie and revered and worshipped the creature rather than the Creator, who is blessed forever. Amen. They are filled with every form of wickedness, evil, greed, and malice. full of envy, murder, rivalry, treachery, and spite. They are gossips and scandalmongers, and they hate God. Although they know the just decree of God that all who practice such things deserve death, they not only do them, but give approval to those who practice them. But you speak the truth, each one to his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be angry, but do not sin, and do not let the sun set on your anger, and do not leave room for the devil. No foul language should come out of your mouths, but only such as good for needed edification, that it may impart grace to those who hear. And be kind to one another, forgiving one another as God has forgiven you in Christ. This is actually a compilation of excerpts from several of St. Paul's letters, one to the Romans and one to the Ephesians. And they talk about, some very different things. What we've juxtaposed here is where Paul is talking about people who are elevating human action, human reason, the human way of looking at things, and elevating it to the point where, we don't really need God. We don't need to give him thanks. We don't need to be humble because we owe everything to God. Instead, we can impose what we want on other people because somehow we know what's best. And if we don't get what we want, then we'll protest violently. We'll loot, we'll burn, we'll destroy things that belong to other people, even if it's the house of a certain mayor. It doesn't matter. And because we are not living according to the precepts that God has given us, we don't give respect to God.
Absolutely not, Ray. I think one of the things that comes to mind as we're talking about this is that we expect from God, we'll believe you, Lord, if you fire a lightning bolt and wake me up. I want the skies to open. I want the heavens to shone. I want a light shining down right on me like it's a spotlight and it's beaming on me like I'm in a Broadway show. And for me, that doesn't ring true. You talked about Utah and the beauty of that in the opening. For me, I've done a lot of traveling on the road, taken the kids on vacation and done many things. And while others would find it difficult to see God in this moment, I was driving through the Dakotas on my way back home to St. Louis with the kids in the car asleep as the sun was rising at 5 o'clock in the morning, 4:30 in the morning. And you look over that beautiful prairie and you see God. As the sun rises, you see God. It's not a lightning bolt. There's not a bright spotlight. It is the beauty and the presence of God. And some people don't even like those plains. They think they're ugly, they're flat. I don't want anything to do with them. There's nothing up there. You can't grow anything. It's too cold. And the beauty that God put in those prairies where buffalo are and prairie dogs are was just stunning to me, especially in the morning. And I think we miss God. I think we truly don't see him unless we're looking for him. And therefore, we're more than happy to start imposing our own truth rather than taking the truth of God. And we tend to sort of make it up as we go. Whereas truth is the same when God created the earth as it is today, as it was when St. Paul was writing. The truth is, and we sort of manipulate it and play games with it. And we need to reach out and look for who God is in all of those things that we see.
Yeah, if we did that, there would be less of a desire to be throwing these water jugs filled with they're filled with concrete or something, throwing them at cops.
Right.
All these things that are happening. We'd obviously be less prone to doing those things if we thought there was a God maybe looking down on our action. If we thought that there was a God who loved us.
You bet.
How many of these people are acting the way they are because they don't feel loved? And if you feel loved by God, then nothing here on this earth matters. If you're protesting because some social condition is not as good as it could be, or you want to change this, you want to change that, none of that would really matter. You'd have a certain peace of mind and heart and soul. You wouldn't have to do those things.
And if there was something, Ray, to truly challenge, which there is, we would do this in a way where we would bring our issues to the government to show them where they're headed, not take violence into our hands and hurt people, burn mayors' houses down, go out and strike others, hurt one another, right, physically. We would go and bring our data, our information, our desires, and allow that to be done without hurting one another, right? It seems crazy to say, I don't like you, I don't like your policy, so I'm going to beat you with a hunk of concrete or a rock or a gun or a Molotov cocktail, right? So I feel so strongly about my point, I am going to injure you. How does that fit?
That doesn't fit. That doesn't. No. If you respect the other person, if you think that the other person, if you really believe in equality, as is one of these key words that people always throw around. If you really believe in equality and believe in every other person is as important as you are, or if you really believe in Christian teaching, if you think they're more important than that's not necessarily true. But often enough people who really feel the love of God, that's how they behave, as if other people are more important than them. You wouldn't be doing these things.
Absolutely.
And the other thing is, it's this last line of this first section of St. Paul's letter, where it says, although they know the judgment of God, although we know these things are wrong, not only, even knowing that, not only do they practice them, but they give approval to those who practice them. And I think what's really distinctive of what was going on with a lot of these so-called protests, these quote protests in our cities today, is that we have so many people in positions of authority who approve them. So many people in positions of authority who tell policemen, no, don't do anything, don't interfere. They don't call in the National Guard. And we have burning and mayhem and injuries and people getting hurt when they don't have to. This doesn't have to be. And they allow it. They approve it. That's really different. Why? Why is that? So there is a real problem that we have that is different than we've had in this country before. But also, what does St. Paul tell us? He says, no, instead of doing that, you need to speak the truth. And what is the truth? Hey, there is a God. There is right and wrong. No, we shouldn't be doing these things. We should never be committing violence against another person. How ironic is that? We're going to protest people mistreating other people. And so to make that point, what are we going to do? We're going to mistreat other people. Somehow that doesn't make sense.
And Jesus didn't do that when he was here.
Right.
Jesus listened, and we have to listen. There are reasonable grievances. That's what this country is about, is listening to others and trying to come up with what is fair. And we have to listen to the demands and the requests and what folks are saying. But to then turn to violence if you don't get your way, that just reminds me of being a little child and getting torqued at your mom and yelling or screaming or hitting her because you didn't get what you wanted. We have to figure out, like Jesus did, how to listen, how to love, and how to speak the truth, as opposed to it's either my way or the highway. Hooray for my side, hooray for my sign. I'm going to go get you if you don't believe. And we've got it. Jesus was so far away from that, and he put his truth there. He laid it out to people, and he allowed them to choose that, to hear the great word that he had.
Yeah, and what's to prevent people from not following Jesus? I mean, what's to prevent people from doing these acts of violence? What's going to restrain them? If you think, hey, I'm protesting an unjust social condition, if I am protesting social injustice, and if society won't listen, if the government won't listen, if they won't react at all or they won't react fast enough, then I'm entitled to do these things. And then all you do, we've had the situation in the Middle East for how long, right? Somebody does something wrong to somebody else. They remember that, and then they want to reciprocate, and it just goes on and on and on and on. And so, if there's social injustice that goes on in this country, and then you go ahead and in response to that, you mistreat other people, then what? Are they going to want to mistreat you in return? Where does it stop? So, hopefully we would have government leaders who would understand this and see the dangers that chaos and mayhem hold for society as a whole. It's just not good for the whole people. So what's to keep government leaders from saying, "Oh, this is okay"? Well, they need to have a moral compass. They need to have a moral foundation. And there's a foundation if you believe there are things that are true. And if you don't have this, if you don't have a faith in God to guide you, maybe that's why we're where we're at, where the government leaders aren't restraining the people from doing what they're doing. So, instead, if you have that foundation, then you can understand St. Paul when he says, "Hey, don't let the sun set on your anger." Hey, not even foul language should come out of your mouth, let alone, bricks flying through the air. Not even foul language. So that's the choice we have. That's the choice we have.
And some writers have been putting this forward. I think, to me, a couple of them that come to mind is Shakespeare wrote Romeo and Juliet, which was people getting out of control, allowing violence to take over, and then horrible things happening to their young folks. These two teenagers who are in love end up dying, right? West Side Story, way too much violence for all of these folks and people getting killed. There's writers that have been telling us you have to contain your anger, right, and be able to talk with people rather than going out on the streets, because violence leads to more violence. Violence against somebody, they want to retaliate. And we've got to get to the point where we love one another. We want to listen. We truly want to listen to each other and then try to sort this out. And, of course, for me, listening, as you listen, God's Word shows up, and it really comes about, and it makes so much sense as you listen.
So it's curious that the title of Zane Grey's book was Riders of the Purple Sage. You picked purple. Why purple? What's involved with purple? Well, purple is red and blue. Blue is often associated with peace, especially, a pale blue or a light blue. Look up at the sky and you could feel peaceful. People who have had mystical experiences with the Blessed Virgin Mary, St. Catherine Labouré, other people who've had this over time, often enough, a lot of times people say that she's seen surrounded by a field of of blue, of light blue, of peaceful blue. But also, besides blue, what's involved in purple? Red. Oh, what is red? Fury, right? Fury, intensity, anger. So purple is kind of like this mixture, all in one color. You've got this dichotomy that we're talking about between love and peace on the one hand and then, fury and anger on the other. And, just to think that, Zane Grey wasn't the only, artistic mind who was struck by this. There was a song popular in the 60s by Jimi Hendrix, Purple Haze. And in that song, he, part of these lyrics, like the first verse were, the words were, "Purple haze all in my brain. Lately things, they don't seem the same. Acting funny, but I don't know why. Excuse me while I kiss the sky." So here you got a guy, and he's talking about being in a purple haze, and nothing seems the same. He's acting funny, and, excuse me, I'm going to go kiss the sky. There are images and visions that come with that. He's acting funny. And he's going to try to kiss the sky. It just seems like it really is talking about the very same thing we're talking about. There is a God. We know he's up there. Some part of us deep inside wants to reach out to him and, feel the peace and the love that comes with that. But at the same time, we're still here on earth, and we end up, acting funny and doing things that, don't seem right to us. It's the same thing over and over. It's this dichotomy. And the problem is, if we don't have this foundation, if we don't remember, for example, or listen to the writings of St. Paul, we can fall prey to, acting funny. We've got a guy recently who shot a man in Portland. His name was Michael Forrest Raynall. He was 48. He was a father of 2 children. And he recently was wanted. There was a warrant that issued for his arrest. for the fatal shooting on August 29th in Portland of a gentleman, Aaron J. Danielson. Mr. Danielson was wearing some kind of a Patriot prayer hat. And anyways, he was shot and killed. And it's believed he was shot and killed by this Michael Forrest Raynal. And Raynal, talking about the shooting afterwards, said, "I was confident that I did not hit anyone innocent." So he admitted to shooting him, but this person was not innocent, so it was okay. So judge, jury, and executioner in a moment. There's no trial. There's no, who was Jay Danielson? I mean, did Raynal really know? Shot and killed him. But it's okay, because he was not innocent. This is dangerous stuff. Raynal, he had, if you're in a rage, you're going to be acting. I mean, if you're in a mental rage, you're going to be acting in a rage. In June, he was arrested for driving under the influence. Apparently, he was driving 111 miles an hour with his daughter in the car as he was racing his 17-year-old son in another car. So putting both of his children and himself at risk of injury or death. Anyways, so he was arrested for this, but then didn't show up for the court hearing. Didn't do that. Then in July, he suffered a gunshot wound because he was wrestling with some particular stranger. Then later in July, he was wounded in a brawl in a downtown Portland park. He was. I mean, this is all in the span of 2 months. That there were these 4 incidents which ended with this murder of this poor guy in Portland. That's a rage. That's a rage. So what is motivating this guy? What's animating him to act as he is? Well, he actually explained a lot of it. He had some online posts and gave some interviews. And here are some of the things he said. For example, he said, every revolution needs people that are willing to and ready to fight. He wrote this according to the Oregonian. He said also, there are so many of us protesters that are just protesting without a clue of where that will lead. That's just the beginning. That's where the fight starts. If that is as far as you can take it, thank you for your participation, but please stand aside and support the ones that are willing to fight. I am 100% Antifa all the way. I am willing to fight. So Antifa, as he also said, is simply short for anti-fascist, and he's anti-fascist. But fascism is nothing more than somebody imposing either a single leader or a few people imposing, their will on other people. And here he is doing the very same thing. In any event, there's a friend of this guy who was shot. This guy Danielson was shot. He had a friend named Pappas. And Pappas said, when he heard he heard some shooting when Danielson was killed. He says, it takes a second for you to process everything that happened. Did he just shoot at me? This came as a surprise to him as somebody was shooting. He said, which kind of contradicts what this other person was saying. I know I didn't shoot somebody who was innocent. Well, was this guy Danielson doing something? Was he committing some wrong against somebody else? Was he acting hostile towards Raynal? Well, apparently Pappas didn't think so because he was surprised that somebody was shooting at them. Anyways, he said, I turn over and Jay's dead because he believes something different. Jay's not a racist, a xenophobe, or whatever. He's not an ism or an ist. He was a person. So if Raynal thinks, well, I didn't shoot somebody who was innocent, is that because he is an ism? Could he really even know Danielson? I mean, this is where this is what happens when people act in a rage. This is what is animating people. They think they're protesting for some cause, and if they end up shooting somebody and that other person's dead on account of it, somebody they don't even know, well, it's okay. He's not innocent. And I guess it's okay because, killing people is okay in a war. And, Raynal said, He described the shot that killed Danielson as, quote, the beginning of a war. These people think they're in a war. And so how does this end for Reinhold? How do you think this ends for Reinhold? Is it going to end good? So a warrant issues for his arrest, and some cops go north into Washington. There's a town outside of Seattle called Lacey, Washington. And there they find Reinhold. He's in a car. And witnesses, according to the Olympian, another local paper, witnesses said that Reinhold then opened fire on the cops, and then there was a series of 40 to 50 shots that followed. The police apparently said that 4 cops returned fire, and Reinhold's dead. So Danielson's dead, Reinhold's dead. He's got 2 kids. They're now without a father. Where's the good in this?
There can't be, Ray. And a couple of the comments just beg you to ask the question. Somebody is this filled with rage. They're obviously not making good decisions. Putting both your young child and your son, your 17-year-old son, in a car racing at 100 and something miles an hour, there's not a lot of people that know what to do or how to handle that. And certainly if you're on a road and somebody's doing 60, you're coming up on them as if they're sitting still and you're doing 60. I mean, that's in a hurry. And you're going to make some bad decisions. You're going to swerve the car. You're going to move too fast. And if you're encouraging that type of behavior, there has to be something really, really wrong. You're not going to do that unless you're just a little bit off and risk your children. And that has to be that absolute anger or almost a feeling of immortality. I am going to win and I can't lose because I'm working for a cause. And that's scary.
Yes,
That's really scary when you don't care about your kids' lives. You don't care about your own lives. You don't care about the lives around you. That's scary. And I don't think we'd hear St. Paul saying those same sort of things. I think he would say we want to take care of each other. We want to find people that have different views than us and be with them, love them, cherish them, and try to take care of them, not to go out and shoot them.
Oh, I mean, it's this, but it's not just a rage. It's not just a rage with this one person. It's a rage that is being approved of by other people.
Encouraged.
There was an undercover video that was taken of an Antifa group in the Portland area, and apparently there was this undercover video was of a time when instruction was given to these Antifa members about the types of things they should do, and part of the instruction was, quote, practice things like an eye gouge. It takes very little pressure to injure someone's eyes. Close quote. Another quote. It's not boxing. It's not kickboxing. It's like destroying your enemy. So this is just a little snippet of what is given out as instruction to people. St. Paul talked about, hey, they know this is wrong. And not only do they do it themselves, but they approve other people doing it. We've got this violence, and we've got people not just encouraging it, not just allowing it, they're actually instructing people how to do it. Oh, an eye gouge. It takes very little to hurt someone's eyes. What prompts people to do this? Another incident recently in Washington, D.C. The president had the convention, the final night of the convention for his party, and they had this big celebration at the White House, and then after it was over, people were walking through the streets. One of the people that had been to this event and then was walking through the streets was a Jewish rabbi, R.E.A. Sparrow. He wrote a book apparently called Pushback, Reclaiming Our American Judeo-Christian Spirit. So he believes in Judeo-Christian morals and values, the type that we're discussing here every week. Anyways, so he said after the event was over, he was directed to exit the White House grounds onto 17th Street. And that was, and then what happened after that is he just got caught up in this thing, and he was being directed on directions where to go to avoid the mob, and And he ended up getting pushed further and further away from the direction that he wanted to go to get back to his hotel, but he was just trying to avoid the mob. And they were asking for help from police along the way, but nevertheless, this is what happened. They ended up just getting moved in these different areas. And he said the response from the police was, in essence, because they were asking for help, and he said the response from the police was, in essence, move on. I can't tell you where to go. Just move on. Just get out of here. You're on your own. And, they had encounters with stragglers of the mob. He said he didn't encounter like a full-blown mob, but they encountered just isolated stragglers of this larger mob. But the stragglers were aggressive and swearing and following them in a belligerent manner, to use his description. And so I think he's an elderly gentleman, so it's maybe him and his wife. And he says I kept asking myself, how could this be happening on the streets of a major American city? How could a law-abiding man and his wife, he was traveling with his wife, how could a law-abiding man and his wife be left to fend for themselves against vicious people intending to threaten them? What type of mayor instructs the police department to be so indifferent? So that's what he was feeling. And apparently at one juncture, they were successful in getting an Uber. And so they got into the Uber vehicle. And then at some point when they were getting, I guess, somewhat close to the hotel, the Uber driver stopped. They weren't at the hotel yet, but the driver stopped. Why? He said, I can go no further. It was too dangerous for the Uber driver to go further. This is America's capital. This is not Beirut. This is not, Afghanistan. This is Washington, D.C. I can't drive any further because it's too unsafe to drive a car there. In the capital of the nation. Well, he says eventually they succeeded in making their way back to the hotel, and they wanted to go in the front door, but they couldn't go in the front door. They were lucky enough, they found a side alley, and they found a corner door, and they got into the hotel and then walked into the lobby. And just as they were getting into the lobby, there were a rush of protesters outside the main doors of the hotel lobby, and they were trying to get in. And just at that moment, a congressman from Georgia, Democrat, black man who happened to be at this event for the president, because he apparently supports the president, he was like trying to get in the door. Apparently the mob was after him, and because of who he was, the security and the police stopped the mob and allowed him to, successfully enter into the hotel. I mean, it's just, well, I've used the word before, but it's mayhem. Anyways, he also said, this rabbi, somebody's financing this. This is what he says. Somebody is financing this. He said what he observed were a lot of fancy black Suburbans picking up and dropping off people for these protests. He saw some of these people staying at the very expensive hotels. He said he watched equipment being loaded and unloaded in what would be the city's most expensive underground garages. These are things he witnessed. All of these things take money. So there are people not only doing these things, but approving others doing these things, even though they know that there are people out there like the Catholic Church, a lot of other Christian churches, a lot of other faiths, Jewish faiths, other faiths that say, these things are really against the principles of God. They know it's wrong, they do it anyway. And it's happening in our nation's capital, in Portland, and Kenosha, and New York City, and here and there. I mean, it's coming to a town near you.
It's really scary, and it just shouldn't be that way. Our leaders are not, they're kowtowing, right, to a group of people that's very loud, and that's weak when we do that. It takes strength to stand up and say, this is wrong. We want to hear what you have to say. We want to talk about it. We want to come to a conclusion. We want to see what's legal under our system. We want to put the rules and enact them. But it's very weak to allow these kind of things to go on and to occur, and to encourage it nonetheless. To say I'm pulling the police out. I'm directing them not to do anything. How does that not encourage someone that wants to do these kind of activities? If you're afraid of the police force and what they bring, you really think things through. But if you're being told no police are there, they're not going to do anything to stop you, why would you not go after that if this is truly in your mind? Hopefully the answer would be because this is not something I should be doing, but it seems like that's gone out the window.
Oh, it's gone out the window. So how does this happen? How did we get all these different people who think this is okay? People involved in the process, government leaders, mayors, governors, et cetera. How does this happen? Well, it happens because ideas get spread. These things are always preceded. These things that just don't happen in a vacuum. They're always preceded by ideas. And if this is any kind of a clue where ideas are going and where our young people may be led even more and more, it's something I thought was very interesting because I'd never heard of anything like this before. But there's an actual sanctioned college course on how to overthrow the state. So you are now going to get college credit. You don't have to go to an underground Antifa rally and get told how to overthrow the state. Now you can take a college course and get credit for it. Now you got to pay for that. But, yeah. Now, part of this college course involves producing a manifesto. Okay? I mean, obviously perhaps a reference to the Communist Manifesto. You have to explain, one of the things students are going to be tasked with doing is explain ways in which you're going to overthrow a sitting government. How will you attain power? So what are students going to write about? Maybe violence. How are you going to overthrow a state? Will there be, how many students are going to write, well, we're going to do this completely peacefully? Are we not encouraging violence and now giving it the blessing of having academic credentials? So that's what's going on at Washington and Lee University. Now, at that university, the faculty recently voted that the name Lee should be removed from the name of the university because Lee refers to Robert E. Lee, general in the Confederate Army, and one associate professor is apparently leading an effort to remove the name Washington as well because it's in honor of George Washington, and we all know, I guess he, was a slaveholder, and so he was obviously a bad guy where we have to erase his name from history. Part of the course talks about rewriting history and confronting memory. George Washington needs to be removed. Now, if Washington was a slave owner, and I guess he was, and if he condoned slavery, and I guess he did, and if he subjugated people to, being property of other people simply because of their skin color, okay, that's a failing, right? So is the proper reaction to that to erase the man from history as if he never was? Is that the proper response? Or is it to say, hey, guess what? Like a lot of other humans, he was a mixture of good and bad. Here's the good, here's the bad. If we have a history that only told the good side of Washington and never told the bad, and there was a bad, would it not be a better, more truthful, more objective history, more accurate history to say here's the good and the bad? Yeah. Yeah. And can you learn from the truth? Can you learn from that? Yeah. Now, if you have a jaded history which presented only the good, is the right answer then to produce an equally jaded history that produces only the bad or just wipes him out entirely as if he never existed? That is not the truth. That's not the truth of the matter. And, when you get into dealing with erasing people from history, now you're on dangerous territory. Now you're going down a very dangerous rabbit hole. Because what guides you in that? Well, you've got an idea of history. You've got a story you want to tell. Well, fine. How many people have opinions and judgments and so forth? How do you find out where the truth lies, which are the better opinions and which aren't? It's if you get all the facts, put them all on the table. Just replacing one bad history with another bad history That's not the way to do it. There's an article, and this may be of some interest to you, Bob. I mean, you're in the educational profession, and there was an article that came up in Education Week, and I think it's designed for primary and secondary school teachers. And it was talking about, a lot of the statues that are being torn down by protesters in this country. A lot of statues. We started with statues of people involved in the Confederacy who were fighting to maintain slavery. But now it is continued to people like George Washington. This effort now, Washington University evidences, and also there's a proposal, I guess, that's being floated now in Washington, D.C., to potentially do away with the Washington Monument, the Jefferson Memorial. We want to erase these people from history. We don't want to remember them. So how do we deal with trying to take down statues and monuments? Well, this article in Education Week gives an answer. It says, by the way, it talks about the usable past. It talks about working to remake the usable past. I wonder what that necessarily means. It certainly doesn't sound like the whole truth. But in any event, it talks about that school leaders should welcome these actions about rewriting the past, and that their history curricula, the history curricula of these schools, is one place to take initiative on racial justice. History, I was a history major in college, and I always thought history was to try to remember what happened so that you didn't make the same mistake. And if we fashion it and shape it into a narrative and it doesn't contain facts, then you don't really know what happened. And you can commit the same mistake again. This article talks about the fact that there were 3 good wars. The traditional view of American history likes to talk about 3 good wars: the Revolutionary War, or all these fine ideas that we have about religious freedom, freedom of expression, all those other things that a lot of us have come to cherish in this country. The Revolutionary War was where, those values were given birth. Then you've got the Civil War, which abolished, ended in the abolition of slavery. Then you got World War II, where we helped secure freedom on a worldwide scale. And so goes traditional thinking. This article says those are the 3 good wars. But then there were other wars like Vietnam, Korea, and the Spanish-American War, which don't fit nicely into the American narrative of American exceptionalism and so on and so forth. And so, those are glossed over. Well, I don't know that they are glossed over. I've heard a lot about the Vietnam War, and in my education as well, that was covered a lot. In any event, the article even says, this is a quote. A lot of what I've been saying are quotes. This is also another quote. Quote, "Too often, history gets taught and tested as facts." Close quote. Too often, it gets taught and tested as facts. As what? As truth. Instead, we need, another quote, a scholarship of activism. We're going to shape it the way we want it. And where else do you find this kind of thinking? Oh, well, here's one sample. Let's go to Nazi Germany. Somebody recently, and again, a lot of people say a lot of different things about Nazi Germany. What we're going to talk about in terms of Nazi Germany are facts. This is an article that came up in Architect magazine. An architect was doing some research on monuments and memorials and the architecture behind them, and particularly in Europe, particularly around the time of World War II. And he was doing some research in the military archives in Freiburg. That's in Breisgau, a university town in southwest Germany. And he came across a misplaced copy of a directive from Field Marshal Wilhelm Keitel. It's dated August 12, 1940. Now, after the war, A lot of evidence of various things that the Germans had done were destroyed. They're trying to keep people from finding out about them. Well, here was one that apparently missed the purge. A misplaced copy of a directive from this Field Marshal Keitel. And it was relaying Hitler's order to Germany's high command. And it was an order from Hitler that Keitel passed on to destroy World War I memorials. So in these areas of France and Belgium and places that they conquered, there were a lot of memorials. And this architect talks about the purpose of those memorials. These were memorials to World War I soldiers. Millions of soldiers were buried in cemeteries across Belgium and northern France. People had died. World War I was a horrific event. Millions of soldiers had died, and there were these monuments there to remember the war dead. There were a lot of pleas made at that time for the loved ones of the bodies of these killed soldiers to be returned, but often enough, logistical reasons or what have you prevented it. So these people were buried in these mass cemeteries in France and so forth. And so creating memorials, according to the architect, became a way to honor their sacrifice and heroism and to symbolically bring them home to rest. It was a burial. It was sort of like it serves the same purpose as a monument to an individual person in a cemetery. If you're an architect, I guess you're concerned with what is the purpose of the structure that you're creating, what is the feeling, what is the human emotion that you're trying to express with your architecture, and so this is what this architect is talking about. This is what this was for. Well, not only did they want to destroy, the Germans want to destroy the memorials to the soldiers who had died in World War I, the French soldiers, the Belgian soldiers, and so forth, because they were fighting against Germany, and that didn't fit the German narrative. Not only did they want to do that, but there were memorials to civilian dead that the Germans wanted to erase. For example, there were 23,700 civilian martyrs of Belgium, and there was a particular national monument to them. Well, the Germans wanted it destroyed because they called it a quote-unquote hate monument. You've got civilians in Belgium killed by Germans in a war. And to Germany, because it was remembering the murders done by the Germans, to Germany, that became a hate monument. The architect talks about this as an act of psychological warfare. When you destroy a monument like that, it's like re-killing. It's like killing the dead all over again. It's not good enough to kill them. Now you have to kill them a second time. When you get into the business of rewriting history according to, which side of the war you were on, this is the kind of thing you do. The problem with it is it affects real people. You've got people who mourn for their dead, and now you destroyed the monument that helps them mourn for their dead. For example, there's another monument honoring 60,000 Canadian soldiers who died. Well, it was deliberately bombed by the Germans. They wanted to wipe out the monuments, the memories, the memorials to the people who had died fighting Germany. Fighting Germany is not a good thing. So the dead, trying to remember the dead who fought Germany, well, that's just not going to be allowed. This is all part of an effort where Hitler wanted to recast the Allies as the losers of the Great War, and Germany is the ultimate victor because Germany, of course, 20 years later, they conquered France in 1940, and so they're the ultimate victor, and so they got the revenge for World War I, so the ultimate victor is Germany, and so we're going to recast history. Of course, Germany ended up being the ultimate loser of World War II as well, but, Hitler didn't have time to rewrite that history.
Ray, as we've been talking, in essence, what we've been talking about is that you can rewrite a lot of things. You can try to do almost anything you want. But what we should be looking for is this real truth. What is really happening? And that's God's truth. You can read something from St. Paul 2,000 years ago, and it still holds true today. And you can try to manipulate and change things. You can get upset. You can hold people to a different standard. Lord knows if 200 years from now they hold us to a particular standard, I don't think they're going to look at today and all that's going on with great glory and compassion. They're going to look around and say, wow, man, was that bad? Folks were killing each other, right, over various issues that should not have been that way. They're going to look at us with disdain. It is God's truth that shines through. It is God's truth that has to keep us through. And all of these examples you're bringing up are trying to, hooray for my side, I've got the truth, you don't, but it could change tomorrow, and it certainly changes from yesterday. And that's not what God's truth is all about. It's the same 2,000 years ago when Jesus walked the earth, and it will continue to be there.
Well, the other thing is that this idea of rewriting history, although it's not new, is a part of Marxist thinking. Karl Marx famously wrote, "In bourgeois society, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past." What you think today, can change, what the history was. You can change history. It already happened, but we can still change it. This idea of, taking down the memorials, it's not just the Nazis. In communist China, it's the same thing. In communist China, today it's a crime to commemorate the dead. It's particularly true of Tiananmen Square, the protest that would happen there and the people that were killed there. Now it is said that there's a whole generation of people that know nothing in China, that know nothing about Tiananmen Square. It doesn't fit the narrative. The Cultural Revolution, likewise, where tens of millions of people have been killed under the communist rule in China, and it's not. People don't know about it. They can't know about it. There has to be, quote unquote, correct thinking of history. The young people's thinking has to be, quote, rectified. You've got a whole department called the Central Propaganda Department. And, on and on it goes. They put so much effort into doing this, and it's all guided by a particular idea. There are no universal values. There's a core belief behind all this propaganda, is that there are no universal ideas. These ideas of the transcendence of law over politics, presumption of innocence, the rule of law. According to the Chinese, these are ideas foisted on China by the West. These are Western ideals, and we don't need them. And the problem is, if you don't have any universal values, like the right of people, the right of each individual to freedom, then you can write whatever you want. You can write whatever rules you want, and then to support whatever rules you want, you can write whatever history you want of things that have already happened. From this idea that there are no universal values, you can see that there's a direct rejection of the idea of truth. There is no truth. There's just what we want now. The present controls the past.
When I was living in China, I actually employed young Chinese engineers to do work. We were trying to get a technical presence in China. And I talked to them about their university experience, talked to them about what they were taught, how they were taught. And one of the things they all expressed was their great desire to get a degree in chemical engineering and mechanical engineering, and that was a big deal. But what they were forced to do was they had to write a paper before their senior year in a class that basically said why China and China's system of communism had to be better than a free market society. And if they didn't take that position and didn't do it convincingly in this paper, they don't graduate. So if you didn't feel that communism was truly the right answer, if you wanted your degree, you had to lie. You had to basically say, I am a believer in this communist system. I am a believer that this is the ultimate system, and I am therefore going to write this paper just to get your degree. So they hang something in front, which is their ticket to the future and an engineering degree, and then say, you have to lie. You either have to tell the truth, you really feel it, or you have to lie, or you don't get your degree unless you state this. That's brainwashing. That's akin to brainwashing, and it's saying, I know the truth, you don't. Here's the rules of play. This is what you're going to do. we got to get back to the truth someplace. We got to get back to the fact that lying is not correct. We've got to get to where we love God and understand what he wants in that plan, and we understand others. We understand that others don't believe what we do, but we need to be loving and sympathetic. Jesus didn't throw out others. He welcomed them. He healed the sick. He wanted them to come to him because he knows that all of us are broken. And then when we recognize that truth, the light goes on. We get to know who he is.
Yeah, I mean, that is the ultimate truth. But one of the consequences, one of the byproducts of that truth, of loving other people, is you let other people have freedom. You let other people do what they want to do. You don't try to control them. That's an element of love. There is this idea that people have freedom comes from the truth that we're created by God. So, these things are all tied together. These ideas of, the fact that there is a God, that's why we're entitled to freedom. And that's why, we have to allow other people, to do what they want. And that's why there is a truth, and it's not, we're not, free to just simply rewrite the past the way we want it. These ideas, they flow together. We have a problem that we're confronting, and that there are people who believe, no, we can rewrite history the way we want it today. Today controls the past. St. Paul's writings from 2,000 years ago that are true now, then, always, everywhere. Yeah, that's not right. If we like some of what St. Paul says, we keep it. If we don't like it, we get rid of it. So we have a problem that we're confronting today, and it would do us well if we did remember the writings of St. Paul, that we do have to give God the honor due him. By doing that, we'll give honor to other people. We will not let the sun set on our anger, and we won't even let foul language come out of our mouths. Well, if we all listen to that, all of these problems that we were talking about would, in fact, be so dramatically changed. And hopefully, we're glad you're listening to this, and hopefully other people will listen to like ideas. Perhaps you can spread these types of ideas. So we're glad that you listened to us today. We hope that you found this even slightly provocative, slightly illuminating, and we hope you join us again. And until the next time, God bless.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
To a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.